Monday, October 20th, bleeding into Tuesday, which is par for the course with my Travis Bickle-like sleep schedule. That's all right. It was a weird start to yesterday, or today, to Monday, we'll say, with seemingly every app known to man having some kind of glitch or outage. Never really got a full explanation of it. I know Amazon had a lot of ties to a lot of the apps that were out, and it was seemingly everything. So that's where I say maybe a solar storm. I can't have the only phone on earth that was acting up, not enough to where you're like, okay, something's wrong, but enough to make it really hard to ignore this weekend. Friday and Saturday, I noticed I'd open an app and the phone would just freeze up. But for like 3 seconds, and it would unfreeze on its own, and force quitting would do nothing. Which, that was a first. Force quitting an app and restarting it by usually I mean 99.99% of the time, that works fine. It did not. That was where I thought, this is odd. And then I woke up Monday and a lot of tweets were, I always go to Twitter to check everything. A hack of mine was, if you're not sure if it's you or your certain something or if it's widespread, type whatever it is and down in a Twitter search, like Google Images down. That'll tell you if it's you or not, 99% of the time. Because someone else will have already tweeted about it, but it's really disorienting when you go on there the first thing of the day and you just see people freaking out. It's total chaos, complete anarchy. What's going on? Why is nothing working? You have no context or backstory as to why, which was how my day started. So I was wide awake 3 seconds after I was still sound asleep, because I saw that and thought, uh-oh, what went on? And of course, like in today's day and age, you never know. So that was an interesting start to the day, though it seems like it smoothed out throughout the day. And it felt like it started with the stuff on the phones. There were quite a few phone apps that were down. And then as the day progressed, it moved on to the TVs, but it also sounded like providers like Sling were able to iron it out, albeit right in the middle of Monday Night Football. That was a tough draw for those watching that, which was interesting tonight. Usually they used to start the season with a Monday night doubleheader, and it would give you like an East Coast matchup or a Midwest matchup, and then there would be some West Coast matchup where it would be a host team from the West Coast that would start the game late, and they wouldn't overlap. And that's what they did tonight, which I don't get why they do that in the middle of the season. And I don't get why they're now doing it numerous weeks throughout the year. Last week it overlapped by all but an hour out of the 3-hour games. That, to me, it just cheapens the brand. I feel like I was fortunate to see the twilight of the Monday Night Football that felt more like an event than a game. Granted, it was a choppy ride there as it hit twilight with the Dennis Miller era. If you want entertainment, go back and watch Monday Night Football with Dennis Miller in the booth. You'll struggle to find someone that looks or feels more out of place. I should say sounds more out of place just in terms of he felt shoehorned in. Feels like it's a two-man booth, or has anyway, since they brought Al Michaels on. Now it's Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, but listening to the Dennis Miller era, it's pretty funny listening to it back, because you're like, so I didn't even know who the modern equivalent would be, but he very much leaned into the entertainment side of it, and it did feel like a production call where production said, hey, Dennis, you got to entertain the people who aren't necessarily the biggest of football fans. And he would throw out some of the most esoteric metaphors and references, and it was just kind of like, well, I get what you're trying to do by having him in the booth, but it's like, if 95% of his references go over the audience's head, then I'm not sure what we're doing here. But knowing that, looking at it in hindsight, it is pretty funny to watch and easy to see why SNL did a skit on it. Though, speaking of good TV, another shout out, but well deserved, to Sci-Fi for once again putting on a solid lineup tonight. They had Saw 3 on earlier. Currently, it's the Winchester House, or Winchester is the name of the movie. It's a decent movie, but that is definitely one of the wilder, I would say, I guess, a tourist attraction houses, though, specifically, that I've ever seen. It's the wildest I've ever seen. It's in San Jose, and it is worth the drive if you're in the area. I don't know if you want to go out of your way to go specifically, because at the end of the day, it's a house. So I don't know if I'd recommend that, but if you're going through the area, it's definitely a must stop, though you do need a couple hours, because it's a lot. It's just a ton of rooms you wouldn't believe if you didn't see for yourself. Basically, Sarah Winchester, the heir of the Winchester Rifle Company, owned this house and had this fear of ghosts that just outdoes anything or anyone I've ever heard about my whole life. She had basically an endless construction crew going on the house and was trying to outsmart ghosts, so she would do a lot of things that were obviously not up to code. She would have them build doors that went to nowhere. There are ramps that go to the ceiling in the house. Not even to an attic, just to the ceiling. Just a ramp to the ceiling. The ceiling itself is different heights. Once you get into the stomach of that house, it actually is really disorienting when you cannot see the outside, because it feels like you've been walking for 3 hours and the end is not in sight. So that in itself too is just unreal. I don't feel like I'm spoiling it at all by saying any of this, because you have to see it for yourself. Like, that's not real. There's no way. And it's really well kept up despite it getting up there in age, and takes a while to walk through, so you do have to have like the entire afternoon for it. But I would recommend it if you ever end up in San Jose. That being said, HBO still reigns supreme. Last night, especially, HBO, a quarter of a century later, it's still the standard for TVs, HBO Sunday nights. And it feels like they're just showing off at this point, because it's not just drama as it usually has been. Now it's comedy too, which is unreal. They had Righteous Gemstones for a while and kind of dabbled in original shows with comedy, but now between that one, a couple others, and currently The Chair Company, it's unbelievable. I don't remember the last time I took a physical toll from watching a show, but that one does it. It's one of the funniest shows, at least of the last 5 years, maybe the last 10. And it's really fun to watch because a lot of times actors and actresses who originate in skit shows and sketch comedy, they do really well with that because that in itself is its own art form, and you usually have to be pretty good at improv and situational comedy, which it feels like a lot of times most people in comedy, they're either situational comics and are really funny that way, but their written stuff doesn't necessarily hold up. And then there's the opposite, where there are comedy writers who write masterpieces, but it becomes fairly evident in a hurry that, improv and sketch stuff is just not their thing. And that's fine. But it's interesting to see when you see a guy like Tim Robinson start from like SNL and some of his stuff on YouTube, it's all sketches, go into an episodic show with a developing storyline and see how it plays out that way. And obviously with Friendship, we've seen him go beyond sketch comedy, and that was a great one. If you like Tim Robinson, it's impossible not to like Friendship. Paul Rudd is awesome in it too. It just stretches out his comedy from a sketch to a full feature-length film. And kudos to A24 for taking a shot on that. Totally worth it. Totally paid off. But a show, too, can be very different from a feature-length film. And this one, it's 2 episodes in, and last night, my ribs still hurt from last night. I won't spoil it, but there are just certain things where you can watch it and know in the moment there are only a handful of people who could elevate this scene from as funny as it is to this. The writing of the scene makes it almost impossible not to be funny no matter who's acting it out. But there's a handful of people that just elevate it to another level that only they can. And with Tim Robinson, it's his face and facial expressions. That and just the erratic volume with which he'll do his voice inflections in, it makes it impossible not to laugh. And there's the first 2 episodes, there's been a scene that just eclipses everything else that happens in the episode, and it makes it impossible not to laugh at everything afterwards. But also then, in last night's case, I had to go back and rewind about 3 minutes of it because I was laughing right through it. And it was funny too in its own right, but a certain scene happened where I couldn't hold it together. It was too much. And so I'm excited for that. But the drama side of things on HBO Sunday night, Task. Wow. Again, I'll fully admit I only watched that show because of its usage of Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd in the trailer. And I thought, if they can get that down, I'll give it a shot. And I watched the pilot, and I thought, okay, this is really good. And then I thought, I bet it either is okay or just kind of drags in the second episode, which was a little bit on the pessimistic side, but I just thought, I feel like this genre, again, admittedly, it's not my favorite but I also thought, like, how wild can you get with the writing in a genre like this? And each episode was just a little bit better than the one before. And the way it progressed, there was not a lot of stuff, if anything, that you saw coming. There were a lot of characters in it that you developed an emotional attachment to or from. Some of them were pretty loathsome, but you cared about all of them, which I think that too in itself is a nod to the writers, because I think the more you write in character after character after character, the tougher it gets to get the audience to latch on to all of them, especially when they're getting screen time in multiple episodes. It's really tough to get them to care about all of them, and you can very easily just kind of get to the point where you're force feeding the audience these new characters and they're not really emotionally invested in the ones you already have. Now it's just kind of a mess on the screen. Whereas, if you just sometimes stick to a tight 3 to 5 main characters, you can get everybody just all in on those. But with this, it's much more difficult, and they get you to care about all of them, and they take you on a ride with all of them. And there's really at no point do you feel like anybody's ever out of the woods. It's a great show. I hate the idea of it getting lost in the shuffle. I know they release certain shows closer to certain awards, but this was one of those where it was hard not to feel like if this came out either the third week of February or like the first week of May, it would have been the talk of the internet. It was that good. And it didn't have anybody in the cast that I would say I'm biased towards, but there were some incredible performances across the board. So if you haven't seen that and you have HBO, I would strongly recommend it. I don't know why you didn't give it a shot, because again, I only watched it because of the trailer and its usage of a certain song, and I did not regret 1 second of it, and I will definitely be going back to watch that. That being said, what is your biggest task for the week?